better focus, better sleep, enhanced mood, and so many other benefits to this amino acid we'll be diving into today on Dr. Osborne's Zone. Stay tuned and we'll be right back to do a deep crash course dive on theanine. You unlock this door with the key of compassion. Beyond it is another world, a world of science, a world of common sense, a world of sanity. You're moving into a land of both empathy and ethics, of nutritional knowledge and empowerment. You've just crossed over to Dr. Osborne's Zone. Welcome to Dr. Osborne's Zone. Look, if you'd like to have more energy, more focus, improvements in sleep, stay tuned, pay attention to tonight's show as we dive in to L-Theanine. Now, L-Theanine, what is it? It is a plant-based amino acid. So this is not like the amino acid crash courses we've been doing. This is actually a non-protein amino acid structurally related to glutamate. And we'll talk about why that's important here shortly. It was identified as a constituent originally of Japanese teas in 1949. It's also found in much smaller amounts in certain types of mushrooms or fungi. But if you've ever had a cup of green tea or black tea, these are the primary sources that are known for their L-theanine content. So if you've ever had that cup of tea and thought that you felt more relaxed or you felt more mentally energized, the L-theanine in that tea combined with the caffeine is probably the reason why. Now, L-theanine is an amino acid, and so like many other amino acids, some people get it confused and think, is this essential? Do humans need theanine in order to survive? And the answer is no. To date, there's no established dietary requirement for theanine. It's not an essential or a conditionally essential amino acid. Remember, it's a plant-based amino acid. Humans don't make it, we consume it from these plants. So, intake from tea, variable, often tens of milligrams a day, and regular tea drinkers and supplemental intakes in trials typically range from 100 to 400 milligrams a day, depending on the goal or the trial input. So there's no formal requirement for it, but as a plant-based amino acid, it has many medicinal properties that we're going to dive into, so stay tuned for that. Now, we've got this diagram here showing you kind of the content of teas. So if you look over here on the far left of this diagram, you'll notice yellow tea is greater than green tea, which is greater than white tea, which is greater than oolong, which is greater than black tea. So in order from least to greatest in terms of L-theanine content. So the type of tea matters. So green teas are probably some of the most popular where you'll get the largest quantity on average. Yellow tea is slightly higher than that, about 5 to 6 milligrams, I believe, per dried gram weight. And then we have the other thing that influences content is the growth period. The highest content is found in the bud and the first leaf as the plant is growing. And then we also know that it's higher in spring than in summer or autumn. So L-theanine higher in leaves harvested in spring. And then we also know there are certain genotypes that produce more L-theanine. And so again, botanists have isolated and identified certain gene patterns that will yield more L-theanine from the tea itself. So for those of you who are nerdy and want to geek out on teas, there's a little information for you. Okay, so let's talk about some of the benefits of theanine. One of the key, probably most well-studied benefits is the improvements in sleep that we see. And we'll talk more about the human studies in relation to that in just a moment. We know it can improve focus, cognitive focus and concentration, and we'll talk about that as well and where you might want to apply that in your life. Predictable stress events, things like, let's say you're going to have a difficult conversation with a family member, or friend. We all run into chapters in our life where we have to have those types of things. Or let's say you're going to court. Maybe you got a traffic ticket and you're super nervous because you got to go in there, and that's not a fun thing to do. Or maybe you've got just something in your life that's coming up that's stressful. If you're a student, maybe that's a test. But in any regard, if you have a predictable known stress that's coming up, L-theanine is very, very helpful in those situations, and we'll talk about how to do it in just a moment. But then we also have the fact that it supports healthy inflammatory responses, and not just inflammation, but part of inflammation is your immune system. And there's some great data on L-theanine helping people's immune systems and T cells regulate more effectively. So these are all some of the primary possible benefits that you might want to consider, either getting more L-theanine in your diet through the consumption of teas or by supplementing with theanine as well. So let's show you a couple of research-backed reviews that talk about numerous quantities of benefits that theanine actually has. And so what I want to start out in saying is that this here, you can see these benefits are reported from non-clinical animal or cell studies. So these are not, so a lot of these benefits and a lot of these mechanisms of action where you'll see certain organ-specific mechanisms of action these are all reported from either animal trials or from human cell line trials. But none, so I want you to have that background understanding, because we get into the human trials, it'll make better sense for you. So as you can see here at the top, antioxidant activity. We know that theanine has antioxidant capacity, and that's been shown and again in numerous studies. So it reduces ROS, which is reactive oxygen species. It also has anti-inflammatory impacts, so reduces pro-inflammatory factors. There's been a number of studies that show it reduces tumor necrosis factor alpha and interleukin 6. These are pro-inflammatory chemicals. We know in these animal trials it reduces the inflammation and osteoarthritis, so it actually helps with arthritis inflammation. We know it reduces the inflammatory response. As a neuroprotective, we know that it improves sleep quality. So, one of the things that our nerves are contingent on for their health is sleep. And we know that sleep enhancing benefits of theanine are there, both, and this is true in humans too, and we'll talk about that. We know in animal spinal cord injury models that L-theanine actually prevents nerve damage, reduces the nerve damage, and enhances recovery. And we know that it protects the brain from oxidative damage as well. There are animal studies that show that when you block blood flow to brains of animals, that L-theanine can actually reduce the damage that's caused by that reduction in oxygen. We know it has mental protections. So in seizure disorders, again, animals, reduction in convulsions, emotional and cognitive abnormalities, there's a reduction in those. There's a reduction in stress or stress response. We know that it has anti-cancer activities, including it kills cancer cells. That's what cancer cell apoptosis is. Apoptosis is just referring to cell death. That cancer cells kill themselves as a result of exposure to L-theanine. We know it reduces cancer cell growth and migration, and we know that it reverses the reactions of chemotherapy, and I'll talk about that in a moment. And there's actually some human studies on that benefit as well. So if you're going through chemotherapy and you're really struggling with neuropathy and other problems, we're going to talk about how using L-theanine might help support you on that. We know that metabolic regulation, it reduces a number of different compounds that can increase or enhance metabolic syndrome. Again, these are animal study models. We know that it reduces liver damage, hepatic steatosis, so fatty deposition of the liver. And we know that it regulates intestinal microflora, which we'll talk about too. Cardiovascular protection, disruption of circadian rhythm, reduces vascular remodeling and the formation of neointima, so has protective effects for blood vessels in the cardiovascular system. We know it protects the liver and the kidney. As I mentioned before, liver cirrhosis or damage to the liver, it reduces that in animal and cell line studies, and then it has kidney protective effects, reducing toxicity to kidneys. And then we know it has immunoprotective effects or immunoregulatory effects. It helps balance your T cells. T cells are specialized cells that when they overreact, you can develop different kinds of autoimmune diseases. We know that it balances or improves intestinal mucosal immunity, so it helps the intestinal lining directly. And there's animal trials, and they're using this in many animals to protect the animals and the outcome of the animal as a crop to harvest for food. And then the immune stress of innate immunity. And then other effects up here: increased motility of epididymal sperm. So basically, it improves sperm motility. We know it reduces intestinal pressure and reduces bladder hyperfunction, so a lot of proposed benefits based on, again, animal trials and cell mechanistic trials. What I'm going to focus on today, I wanted to give you just a general overview, because one of the things about L-theanine is there's not enough research on it. It's a very active field of research. They're doing more research on it, but we'd love to see more human trials come out of it, because there's tons of animal and cell line studies that have tremendous potential for theanine to be therapeutically used. This is another study diagram that summarizes some of the benefits, and you'll notice here that on this side there are human clinical and epidemiological studies in people, that's why the human is here, on the alleviation of immunosuppression, so the improvement of immune cell function. We'll talk about that, specifically the studies. We know that it helps in the prevention of colds and flus, and it helps to promote recovery after surgery. So these are all human studies that have been shown with L-theanine. Now we know in vitro, which are cell line studies, and in animal studies, we know it has immune regulatory effects. As I was talking about a moment ago, it reduces inflammation, it alleviates nerve damage, and it regulates the intestinal immunity and tumor immunity. So it has anti-cancer promoting effects. We also know, moving over here, we know that it elevates or helps to increase GSH. What is GSH? It's glutathione. What is glutathione? It is one of the most preeminent master antioxidants in the human body that helps you to detoxify. It helps protect the liver, and it helps the liver take out the trash of the blood, so to speak. Now, in animal studies, there's a lot of different applications potentially that are being looked at. You can see down here, one of them is in regulation of the immune system in poultry and as well as in livestock. What they're actually finding, there've been some interesting studies where they'll give this to animals and it increases their ability to make IgA in their intestine, which prevents against intestinal damage. And one of the dangers to poultry or livestock, especially the way commercial farming is done today, where you have a lot of animals in closed or closer quarters, is infection. And so one of the side effects of infection in the gut of these animals is the production of, so you get a bacteria infection. One of the side effects, or one of the consequences of these bacteria, is the production of endotoxins, or lipopolysaccharides, LPS for short, and these things will cause leaky gut, so they break holes in the gut wall, and subsequently they enter into the bloodstream and traverse to the liver, where they proceed to create liver damage. And one of the things that I just showed you on this animal review study of benefits showed that it reduces liver cirrhosis, but also has effects where it reduces fatty liver, as I underlined down here. This is part of the reason why, is that it regulates the immune system, or upregulates the production of antibodies. These antibodies will bind to these toxins and prevent them from doing as much damage. So when we talk about the immunomodulation, these are some of the potentials for use of theanine in farming. So if you're a farmer doing it at home, you want to feed your animals some green tea or theanine to help them. Talk with your vet first, but just trying to give you food for thought, so to speak. Okay, now back up here in more human mechanistic identities. So we found that theanine activates specialized types of lymphocytes, promotes glutathione synthesis and antioxidant function, and it regulates the production of different cell byproducts called cytokines, which are important in immune function, but also in neurotransmitters. And we know one of the things that theanine does directly is it binds to glutamate receptors Now, if you know, I don't know how much you know about neurochemistry, but glutamate receptors on nerves generally are excitatory receptors. And if we have too much glutamate reactivity, then we can get a number of different consequences that can drive up things like anxiety, perceived stress, but also too much stimulation of nerves creates toxicity of the nerve itself and can damage the nerve. And so what L-theanine has been shown to do is it binds to these L-glutamate, has a mild binding effect to these glutamate receptors, and it calms them down, especially if they're already amped up. And we'll talk more about how that works here in just a moment. So those are some of your main functions. Let's talk next about how theanine works and has been shown to work well for humans. So what I'm going to show you here, a number of different human research studies. Again, the problem with theanine is ideally we'd love way more studies. A lot of these studies are small scale studies, but the good news is many of them are double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled trials, so showing really nice after effects for people. So let's start with this one. L-theanine relieving depression, anxiety, improving sleep quality, and supporting cognitive performance under stress for students, professionals, entrepreneurs, and menopausal women. So if you're one of these, if you're a student, a professional, an entrepreneur, or a menopausal woman, pay attention. A woman. So evidence, and this is a review. So evidence from clinical trials suggests that theanine supplementation can improve mood stability, reduce physiological stress markers. And one of those markers that we've seen it reduce is actually cortisol. And if you know anything about cortisol, cortisol is a catabolic steroid that if you're under chronic stress, now acute stress, not the issue here, it's the chronic stress. When your cortisol is elevated for long periods of time, it acts as a catabolic hormone that reduces your muscle, so it breaks down your muscle, breaks down your bone, it increases your blood sugar, and it ultimately it creates something called a repair deficit. High levels of cortisol make it really, really hard over time for people to heal and repair. So they get into a state where their body is breaking down faster than it can actually repair. High levels of cortisol can also deplete certain vitamins and minerals. So if you're overproducing cortisol, you're going to stress your vitamin C, your vitamin B5 levels will start to drop, your magnesium, your calcium, your zinc will start to drop, and then you start to suffer the consequences of malnutrition as a result of heightened levels of cortisol. And what the review on human trials is saying is that L-theanine reduces cortisol. It actually tames or brings cortisol down. So when I say the physiological stress markers, cortisol being one of them, also enhances attentional control. So it improves the ability to stay focused and keep your attention on something, particularly in students, high demand professionals, and menopausal women. So where we see students having to study, professionals having to be super sharp at work, and then menopausal women generally, especially with those hormonal changes, a lot of times their cognitive function starts to decline. And so L-theanine, again, can be enhancing and effective at improving that. If we look at some of these other studies on L-theanine, so you see here theanine and caffeine. This is combining caffeine and theanine, which you could get together in like green tea. Oral intake of L-theanine and caffeine supplements is known to be associated with faster stimulus discrimination, possibly improving attention to stimuli. We hypothesize that L-theanine and caffeine may be bringing about this beneficial effect by increasing attention-related neural resource allocation to target stimuli and decreasing deviation of neural resources to distractors. Okay, what does all that really mean? What they did in this study is, you can see here, they gave theanine plus caffeine, and it was double-blind crossover. And so what did they find? Factorial analysis suggested that theanine and caffeine seem to have a synergistic action in decreasing mind wandering. So if you're prone to daydreaming, if you're prone to having your mind drift away when you're trying to concentrate and focus on something, what they found is the combination of theanine and caffeine reduced that in individuals. Therefore, our hypothesis is that L-theanine and caffeine may be decreasing deviation of attention to distractors, including mind wandering, thus enhancing attention to target stimuli. So focus on the thing that's in front of you. Staying in the now, being in the moment, right, is what L-theanine really helps to do. I like to look at L-theanine almost like if you do any kind of meditation in the morning, or you do any kind of like mind-body prayer, anything where you're just trying to focus your internal energies on the present moment. L-theanine, if you've ever had a hard time with, with meditation in that way, it's kind of like training wheels for it. It makes the process easier. It allows your mind to not get distracted and stay focused on the thing that you're trying to stay focused on. Here's another study on effects of theanine and attention reaction time. You see here, previous human studies revealed that theanine influences brain function. This current study was designed to evaluate the effect of theanine on attention and reaction response in 18 normal, healthy university student volunteers. So they gave 200 milligrams of theanine or a placebo, and this was double-blinded, repeat measurement design protocol. And then they assessed these individuals at 15 and 60 minutes after consumption under a relaxed condition upon exerting an experimentally induced visual attention task. So they gave them the stressful task to do visually after giving them theanine and measured the outcome. Results evidently demonstrated that theanine clearly has a pronounced effect on attention performance and reaction time response in normal healthy subjects. So basically, think of that in terms of how you might apply it in your life. If you're trying to remember something, maybe you've got a project at work, maybe you're studying for a test, and you having a harder time focusing. What's one of the things that we see in today's world with our kids is they're being pumped full of this drug called Adderall, which in my opinion is just a legal stimulant. It's legalized cocaine. But it's usually dispensed through prescription medication because students are having a hard time focusing at school. And what we're saying is that there's this natural substance that you can drink from green tea. You can also supplement with it that also improves your ability to focus on tasks at hand. Whereas this comes with a laundry list of the potential for addiction and other side effects like B vitamin deficiencies and other problems. Theanine does not. Okay, let's look at this next one here. Acute effects of theanine caffeine combination on attention. This was a placebo-controlled 5-way crossover trial. 20 healthy male volunteers compared the effects of theanine at 200 milligrams and caffeine 160 milligrams, their combination, black tea, and a placebo. And then this is what they found. A dose of theanine equivalent of 8 cups of black tea improves cognitive and neurophysiological measures of selective attention. So improves attention to a degree that is comparable with that of caffeine. Theanine and caffeine seem to have additive effects, so when you combine them, it's even better. You get more focus and more attention. Here's another human study on theanine, and so here's what they found. This was a double-blind trial as well. They gave 27 healthy young adults with 3 doses of L-theanine, 100 milligrams, 200 milligrams, and 400 milligrams versus placebo. They compared to the placebo, 400 milligrams of theanine showed a significant reduction in the latency of the parietal P3B ERP component. What does that mean in English? The findings indicate that L-theanine can increase attention processing of auditory information, so coming through the ears, in a dose-dependent manner. The linear dose response attentional effect was observed, and it warrants further studies of higher doses of theanine. In this particular study, to improve focus from auditory input required 400 milligrams. There was no significant change in the 100 and 200 milligram dose. So if you're aiming to have better focus in your auditory component, this was the dose, at least in this trial in human healthy volunteers, that was effective, so 400 milligrams. Okay, let's keep going. More on attention. So this was actually a study on kids with ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity. And so this also being a randomized controlled trial, double-blinded. You see, the study demonstrates that 400 milligrams daily of theanine is safe and effective in improving some aspects of sleep quality in boys diagnosed with ADHD. So one of the problems with ADHD diagnosis is the trouble sleeping, and then when the sleep is dysfunctional, then it sets the whole day up the next day in a bad way. So you see here, since sleep problems are a common comorbidity associated with ADHD, and because disturbed sleep may be linked etiologically to this disorder, L-theanine may represent a safe and important adjunctive therapy in childhood ADHD. To me, it beats what we were talking about earlier, which is putting the kid on Adderall, which is what most of them want to do. Actually, if you follow the money on that, a lot of schools are paid extra money to get the kids diagnosed with ADHD because the government gives more money the more disorders the school has to handle. So there's an incentivization to push for the diagnosis. Unfortunately for the kid, once the diagnosis is pushed, then the medicine is typically, like I said, it's typically a prescription drug that isn't going to do them any long-term favors. But theanine may represent an approach that if you are looking for a natural way to potentially help your child, you might look a little bit more into theanine. And of course, always larger long-term studies looking at the wider therapeutic role of this agent in this population are warranted. So in other words, there's not enough research, let's do more research. I agree, let's do more research. In the meantime, there's no harm in taking L-theanine, so if you're struggling with ADHD or you know someone who is, you might read more about it and look into it. Here's another study with ADHD. So we examined the acute effects of L-theanine, caffeine, and their combination on sustained attention, inhibitory control, and overall cognition in boys with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And what they gave was the L-theanine at 2.5 milligrams per kilogram of body weight, combined with 2 milligrams of caffeine per kilogram. They're combined and a placebo were administered. So their combination and a placebo were administered in a randomized 4-way repeated measure crossover with washout. It was 5 boys aged 8 to 15. L-theanine improved total cognitive composite and NIH Cognition Toolbox versus the placebo. You can see down here L-theanine and caffeine combination improved total cognition composite. This study summarizes theanine-caffeine combination may be a potential therapeutic option for ADHD-associated impairments in sustained attention, inhibitory control, and overall cognitive performance. So if you're struggling and looking for that focus, it may be a better option for you. Let's look at this next one on theanine on cognitive function in middle-aged and older subjects. So this was a randomized placebo-controlled trial. You see here, theanine and amino acid in green tea has been shown to affect brain function by relieving stress, improving mood, and maintaining normal sleep. A double-blind randomized trial was conducted. Subjects were Japanese men and women aged 50 to 69. The conclusion of this study was L-theanine may contribute to improving attention, thus enhancing working memory and executive functions. So again, this was this relatively smaller dose. In this trial, it was a 100 milligram per day dose versus some of the other ones we've looked at, which were 200 and 400 milligrams. So let's do another one here. So this one also on cognition. Randomized placebo-controlled crossover. 9 men and 21 women, age 48 to plus or minus 12 years, who had no major psychiatric illness. They gave 200 milligrams of L-theanine a day or a placebo. What did they find? Verbal fluency and executive function scores improved after L-theanine administration. Our findings suggest that theanine has the potential to promote mental health in the general population with stress-related ailments and cognitive impairments. So better cognition. I think we could summarize it, all these trials that are human nature, to say that L-theanine improves focus, attention, and cognitive function in healthy individuals. Then we have the effects of acute caffeine, theanine, and tyrosine on mental and physical performance in athletes. So this was a study for athletes. They took 20 current or former male collegiate athletes, approximately in their lower 20s, completed a double-blind randomized crossover. The present results indicate that a combination of low dose of caffeine with theanine and tyrosine may improve athletes' movement accuracy surrounding bouts of exhaustive exercise without altering subjective variables. So basically improved movement accuracy, their ability, their coordinative skill set, if you want to put that in English. Okay, now we have, switching gears just a little bit here, it's a randomized trial in healthy adults age 18 to 70. And so what are they looking at? They're looking at giving green tea or a placebo twice a day for 3 months. Among subjects taking the green tea, there was a 32% fewer subjects with symptoms. We're talking about colds and flus, 22.9% fewer overall illnesses of at least 2 days duration, 35.6% fewer symptom days if they did get sick, and then gamma delta T cells from subjects taking theanine proliferated 28% more, so it improved immune system function and reaction. But they also secreted, I didn't highlight this, but they secreted 26% more interferon gamma in a response to antigen exposure. This proprietary formulation with theanine is a safe and effective dietary supplement for preventing cold and flu symptoms and for enhancing gamma delta T cell function. So improvement in the T cells that help fight cold and flu, less symptoms, less illness, and overall improved immune health. Here's another one on the immune system with the combination of using cysteine and theanine. And so this one was against the common cold. You can see the common cold is the most frequent illness caused by viral infection. Recently, we reported that oral administration of cysteine and theanine, and this was to mice, this same group of researchers initially did a study in animal mice, enhanced the humoral immune response associated with antibody production. Based on the mouse study, we investigated the effects of adding cysteine and theanine supplementation on the common cold in humans as a pilot study. So they took a total of 176 healthy male volunteers, randomized to receive either a placebo or a combination of 490 milligrams of cysteine theanine tablets twice a day for 35 days. What did they find? The incidence of subjects with colds during the trial was significantly lower in the cysteine theanine group than in the placebo group. Results suggest that cysteine theanine supplementation may be useful for the prevention of the common cold. So here we are getting ready to go into cold and flu season. You know, what's your takeaway there? Well, one easy takeaway from that is, you know, if you like and enjoy green tea, have some. Have some. You'll get the theanine. You'll get some of that theanine from it, and, you know, potentially supplement if that's what you'd rather do. I'm personally allergic to tea, so I can't drink it. And so if I do theanine, I have to do it through supplementation. Here's a study on the theanine supplementation with patients with major depressive disease or disorder. So in this study, they gave 250 milligrams of L-theanine per day. This study demonstrates with chronic L-theanine supplementation, this was an 8-week study, one, that it was safe with very little to no side effects, with diverse beneficial effects on the improvement of depressive symptoms, on sleep disturbance, on anxiety, as well as cognitive impairment functions in patients with depressive disorder. So it improved their sleep, their anxiety levels, and their cognitive function as well, and it reduced their depression. Let's look at this study on sleep. Now, this is a major review. So this is a systemic meta-analysis of many different studies on the supplementation of L-theanine on sleep quality. And so what they did is they compiled multiple different research studies. And so it was in total, combining all these studies, it was about 897 participants in total. And what did they find? They found that theanine was shown to significantly improve subjective sleep onset latency. They also found that subjective daytime dysfunction was reduced and overall subjective sleep quality scores improved. The findings indicate the potential use of theanine in the management of sleep disturbance And then they go on to give the same disclaimer that most of these studies do, which is we need more studies to make definitive clarity out of it. Now, we got another systemic review of trials on sleep here. And so in this particular paper, they gathered 13 eligible trials based on the criteria that they had put forth. And then this number of people was 550. And the dosing was between 50 and 900 milligrams a day as a standalone intervention on sleep-related outcome measures. So based on the current evidence, supplements with 200 to 450 milligrams a day of L-theanine appear to be a safe and effective way to support healthy sleep in adults. Among the included trials, beneficial effects were reported on both objective and participant-reported outcomes, including measures linked to sleep latency, maintenance, and efficiency, perceived sleep satisfaction, and feelings of refreshment and recovery on waking. Further high-quality trials using objective measures into the mechanisms are needed, right? So it's the way they always end. All studies end. They can't be definitive. There's no such thing as definitive study. But again, 2 major reviews on multiple research trials evaluating the improvement in sleep quality with people taking L-theanine, and both of those major reviews found great evidence that, that theanine improves sleep quality. Here's one on, this is a systemic review on patients with mental disorders. So here's what they did. Among 419 publications, they found 11 studies from 6 different countries that fit their criteria. These studies covered a range of mental disorders, including schizophrenia, attention deficit hyperactivity, obsessive compulsive disorder, major depressive disorder, sleep disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, and Tourette syndrome. These findings demonstrated that theanine supplementation reduced psychiatric symptoms more effectively than control conditions in individuals with schizophrenia, anxiety, and ADHD. So if you come over here and look at part of the discussion, they kind of talk about some of the mechanisms of why they think they found these improvements. And so you see here, one proposed mechanism involves the modulation of neurotransmitter activity, particularly the augmentation of GABA. If you've heard of GABA, you can buy GABA as a supplement too, gamma-aminobutyric acid. The body can produce GABA, but L-theanine augments it or enhances its functionality, so at least according to these authors. So theanine functions as a GABA agonist, so it helps those GABA receptors activate, thereby elevating brain GABA levels, which in turn influence dopamine and serotonin. So the end mechanism is that theanine enhances GABA, which also subsequently enhances dopamine. And if you know anything about dopamine, it's a reward neurotransmitter. It's what makes us feel good. And then also serotonin. And if you've ever been on antidepressants like SSRIs, that's SSRI, that's selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So those drugs modulate or recycle serotonin. So L-theanine, acting through GABA receptors, increases the release of dopamine and serotonin. You can see here, furthermore, L-theanine has demonstrated its impact on various neurotransmitter systems, including serotonin and dopamine. These neurotransmitters play pivotal roles in regulating mood, and imbalances in their levels have been linked to various mental disorders. The ability of theanine to influence the neurotransmitters may contribute to its observed effectiveness in alleviating symptoms associated with depression, anxiety, and attention-related disorders. Research indicates that theanine triggers the release of dopamine in the striatum of the brain by interacting with glutamate receptors and inhibits reuptake of glutamate, leading to a notable increase in GABA. Additionally, it suggested that theanine has neuroprotective effects by blocking NMDA and AMPA receptors, which these are receptors that are excitatory in nature, at least in that area. In a separate study, there was proposed that theanine may shield brain cells from excitotoxicity by calming nerve networks in the brain. The study also revealed theanine acts as an antagonist on NMDA receptors, elevates BDNF, and exerts modulatory and GABA. So BDNF is an anti-inflammatory compound, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. It also helps to repair nerves. So at any rate, One of the other things they found, the modulation of alpha wave activity by theanine may contribute to its anxiolytic effects, meaning its anxiety reducing effects, and improvement in attention-related symptoms. So we've known there are numerous human trials as well that show that theanine improves brain alpha wave production. And this study on theanine and stress and anxiety, this is a review. They took 5 randomized controlled trials using the dose of 200 to 400 milligrams a day for up to 8 weeks. In total, is 104 participants. They found in the 4 studies significant improvements in reducing stress and anxiety. Their conclusion was that theanine supplementation can assist in reducing acute stress and anxiety in people experiencing stressful situations. So going back to what I said before, if you're going into a stressful situation and you know about it, L-theanine 200 to 400 milligram doses, according to those human trials, leads to attenuation of that acute stress. So maybe worthwhile doing if you're trying to get through that day with less overall detriment of stress. Let's talk about theanine with some potential drug interactions. So we've got, one of them is caffeine. And yeah, I showed you a number of these research studies had kind of a combination trials of using them both. But what we know about theanine is it kind of is a counterbalance. So it kind of balances the caffeine out, the stimulus of caffeine. And so it tempers jitteriness, so to speak, where some of you might be hypersensitive to caffeine, where it gives you jitters or makes you have heart palpitations. Well, one of the things that theanine tends to do is, again, it allows you to get the improvement of the caffeine to your energy without this. So it has that interaction. It's not necessarily a bad interaction, it's actually a good one. Antihypertensive, if you're taking blood pressure medication, there's some studies that show that theanine actually kind of lowers or calms this. Because it calms the body, it lowers blood pressure. And so there's a theoretical, I say theoretical because it hasn't been really studied in humans, but if you're taking blood pressure medicine or sedatives, just be aware that taking theanine, it could lower potentially your blood pressure or calm you so much that it has a synergistic effect with these medications, doing too good of a job. And so just be aware of that. And if you're in that category, as always, talk with your doctor about it. Now I want to talk about some of the other mechanisms, some of the other drug mechanisms or interactions that we see. So here's one of the things that happens to a lot of people is they overconsume caffeine. We see this a lot, especially in the youth today, where they're going to Starbucks and they're getting, triple shots, and so they're jamming out on 500 milligrams of caffeine first thing in the day, and then they can't sleep at night. And so in this particular study, they were analyzing how theanine can offset that with caffeine. So you can see here, theanine reduces the excitotoxicity of caffeine. The study evaluated whether theanine improves the sleep quality worsened by caffeine in healthy young women. So if you're drinking a bunch of caffeine in the morning or taking energy drinks in the morning and then your sleep sucks, well, I would just suggest you quit drinking so much energy drinks. But what they're finding is that theanine can reduce caffeine's poor effect on sleep quality. So I guess if you wanted to antidote your energy drinks with theanine, you could make that as an attempt. I think ultimately it'd be a better decision to just reduce the quantity of energy drinks and caffeine that you're taking in. Here's another interesting study, and this one was a mouse study, so it's not human, but I think there's good application for this, because in our world where we have people that are addicted to different drugs, in this case THC or marijuana, tetrahydrocannabinol, the delta 9 is the active ingredient, THC in marijuana. And we're seeing, with the legalization of so much marijuana, we're seeing the emergency rooms fill up with neuropsychiatric problems. Talk to any ER doctor and they'll tell you we're inundated with people now who are overdosing on marijuana, and the psychiatric issues that are showing up and the damage that's showing up as a consequence is not good. And so what these researchers were trying to do is study whether or not theanine could have some type of beneficial effect for these individuals. And so preliminary study is in mice. And so what they found in the mice is that pretreatment with L-theanine blocked THC-induced downregulation of glycogen synthase kinase 3, which is a chemical byproduct of toxicity of marijuana use. So finally, the L-theanine powerfully blocked the development of both affective and cognitive abnormalities commonly associated with adolescent THC exposure. And so their findings here, although it was again not in a human trial but in a mouse trial, you can notice here this big blue box that says significant statement. What they're basically saying here is that we have a record pace at which we're seeing psychiatric problems caused by dope. This is significant because maybe we can look at having L-theanine as a potential antidote of sorts in these individuals. And of course, human trials need to be done. But I would say if you're struggling, there's no danger in taking L-theanine. That's the whole thing. Like a natural substance that has the potential to reduce the potential toxicity of the drug. And if you find yourself addicted to marijuana, or maybe you're doing marijuana because you've got it medicinally for pain or whatever, it doesn't come without consequence, and L-theanine may have some potential implication there. Here's another study that I wanted to share on the administration of theanine and cysteine in cancer patients. So this is actually a human trial, and what they found is that in patients receiving chemotherapy, they gave cysteine and theanine both of these amino acids. For cysteine, they gave 700 milligrams, and for theanine, they gave 280 milligrams, which alleviated the adverse effects caused by the anti-cancer drug, reduced the frequency of therapy suspension or discontinuation caused by adverse events. So a lot of times when people are going through chemotherapy, they have to stop because the side effects are so aggressively terrible that they can't go on. And so what these researchers are saying is that the administration of cysteine and theanine allowed those people to continue their course of therapy, but also reduce the side effects from the therapy that they were going through. So if you know somebody going through chemo, and L-theanine is not going to interfere with that, and safe to take. Those are not high doses, and cysteine as well. Cysteine's safe, 700 milligram dose of cysteine. Here's another one. You know anybody addicted to nicotine? I know there's a bunch of people online saying take nicotine for everything now, and that nicotine is a wonderful, great thing, and I don't agree with those statements, but a lot of people are highly addicted to nicotine, and it's the active ingredient in cigarettes. This was a mouse-based study on how L-theanine attenuates nicotine reward and withdrawal symptoms in mice. So what they found was that by giving L-theanine, it reduced the side effects of withdrawal from nicotine in this animal model. So hyperalgesia, and somatic signs during nicotine withdrawal. So our results support the potential of L-theanine as a promising candidate for treating nicotine dependence. So are you struggling to get off? Are you trying to quit smoking? Are you using nicotine patches because you're addicted to nicotine? You might want to just look into L-theanine as a potential aid in that situation. Oh, let's see here. Let's look at this here. So this is another study more about medication, specifically for Parkinson's treatment. So what this research study was investigating was mainly the fact that patients with Parkinson's disease who are on long-term L-DOPA, you have to understand L-DOPA, the primary drug to treat the tremors in Parkinson's disease, actually creates the very problem it's treating as you're on the drug for long periods of time. So it's one of the problems with long-term L-DOPA use. And you see here, we hypothesize, this is their study, we hypothesize the idea that L-theanine being a potent natural agent against L-DOPA induced dyskinesia, since that means movement disorder or movement abnormalities, since long-term reliance on dopamine replacement therapy is linked with elevation in glutamate receptor activity. Remember what I was telling you earlier is that one of the mechanisms by which L-theanine exerts its impact, we believe, is by blocking glutamate. And glutamate is an excitatory neurochemical. And so here's maybe a better visual for you to understand this is that in Parkinson's disease itself, you get oxidative stress of nerves, nerve excitotoxicity, and nerve inflammation, and all these things can contribute to Parkinson's disease. And then the treatment for Parkinson's disease is L-DOPA. And if you're on that for long periods of time, you get hyperactivated glutamate receptors, which induce movement disorder. So it actually creates a bigger part of the problem, right? So what they're finding in animal research specifically is that L-theanine blocks this, inhibits this, because it interacts with this glutamate receptor. So this glutamate receptor is responsible for this dyskinesia, and L-theanine helps to block that. But L-theanine has other potential neurological benefits. It reduces neurological stress, it reduces neuronal excitotoxicity, and it reduces inflammation in the nerves. So what they're saying is that there's a potential therapeutic role of using L-theanine possibly in patients long-term who are being treated for Parkinson's, but there's also a potential possibility that just using L-theanine alone might have neuroprotective effects. No human trials that have confirmed, so what I'm not saying here is if you've got Parkinson's that taking 400 milligrams a day of L-theanine is going to cure your Parkinson's. It's not what I'm saying. But if you have it and you're trying to do something natural, possibly to attenuate the long-term dopamine side effects, maybe worth a shot. Here's kind of another visual for you and the way that theanine impacts nerves. So you've got different things that can impact or damage nerves. You've got stress and aging and post-operative complications and side effects of medications, as we just talked about, a lot of different medications. And then when you impair that nerve, depending on the nerve and where it's located, you can get sleep dysfunction, mood problems, neuropathic pain, and even organ damage. And so what they're finding in animal and cell research is that theanine helps to attenuate these things as it relates to neurological problems. So I'd love to see more research in humans coming out on this, but as we've talked about so many times before, it's very hard to gather the money to do human research trials. Most of the money on research and human health goes to drugs, unfortunately. This is maybe a good time as we're going through a movement to make America healthier again, would be maybe a time to contact the people in political power and let them know you'd like to see more of our tax dollars, hard-earned tax dollars, go to something more meaningful than just only medication. Let's start studying these natural components for their impacts and effects on health. Okay, is it safe to supplement with theanine? Simple answer, yes, it's very safe. So L-theanine is on the generally recognized as safe list in the US as a food ingredient. And it's approved for up to 250 milligrams per serving as a safe amount. And then there's also multiple randomized controlled trials that report good tolerability at 200 to 400, even up to 900 milligrams a day. There's studies that show that high of a dose for relatively long periods of time, months, is safe with very little to no adverse side effects. So adverse effects, usually uncommon and mild. What can they be? Headaches or GI upset in some studies. And then monitoring for low blood pressure or dizziness. Again, this is especially true if you're on blood pressure medication. Some work shows reduced heart rate and sympathetic responses to stress. In other words, what I like L-theanine for in practice as far as supplementation is concerned is you take somebody who's sympathetic dominant. So sympathetic dominance, this is fight or flight. If you find yourself anxious all the time, you're not digesting your food very well, you're not sleeping well, your gut's bloated because you're not digesting very well, you're prone to any form of stress just wiping you out, in other words, the little stressors have become the big stressors, right? You're sympathetic dominant. And this is where I really like to support somebody with theanine is why? Because what does theanine do? It attenuates the stress response. One of the impacts here is it can reduce cortisol. We see that in some trials. But what I have found, at least in my own practice, is that the use of L-theanine for many of these people that are living right here, is similar to what they found in other human trials. What do we find? Well, these people in fight or flight, now we use theanine, and what happens is they sleep better. So then what happens? It's like a chain reaction, right? When you get better sleep, you wake up with more energy, your mood enhances because you have more energy and you're actually able to sleep, so you have better outcome, a better, psychological outcome on your day. When you're stuck here for a long period of time, just getting this needle to move right here, this sleep, is super critical. And we always, I always talk about fundamentally what are the 6 things that you have to do, you cannot negotiate with to have good health. One is your diet. It has to be real food. It has to be a clean diet. It has to be food you're not allergic to. It needs to be free of chemicals, additives, and all the pesticides and other chemicals. Number 2 is what we just talked about, your sleep. If your sleep is disrupted, that's going to be bad. Number 3, we've got to have movement, exercise. Number 4, we got to have sunshine. And 5, we got to have clean air. And 6, water, clean water. So if you don't have these things going on in your life, really prioritize. This is your primary to get healthy. And so when we can get people to sleep better, who are in a chronic state of fight or flight or have been, and not because necessarily they're really stressed, but because they've been sick so long, they're so frustrated and so amped up and so angry with people around them. They're angry with their doctors because all the treatments and all the things haven't worked. And so they're stressed to the max because their body's failing them and they don't know why, and they're not sleeping as a result. So if we can move the needle here with L-theanine, sometimes it's a game changer. It begins to help get that person in a better state of mind and move in the right direction. What's the dosing here for L-theanine in terms of sleep? What I like to use is, I like to always just start with 200 milligrams, but typically what I find is we got to go up to 400 milligrams, and ideally this is going to be approximately 30 to 40 minutes prior going to sleep. So this is one of the key things that I have found to be extremely helpful for this right here. And it works even better if you, in my experience, if you combine it with things like L-tryptophan, which is an amino acid that helps make serotonin and melatonin. And also if you do, you can do other things. A lot of people find magnesium, especially magnesium 3 and 8, to be super helpful in that regard. But getting that sleep activated, again, it sometimes is the thing that moves the needle in the right direction. So this is one of my favorite reasons to use it. My other favorite reason to use it is, let's say you're trying to focus. You need to sit down. You've got a lot of work to do. And this is, what I was saying earlier about the research studies on entrepreneurs and students. And, for me, when I sit down to study, or when I sit down and I really need to be hyper-focused and I need to have all my distractions out, I will definitely mix caffeine. I'll take about, usually in the form of a cup of coffee or some other caffeinated beverage, but about 120 milligrams plus theanine. And now my mind's going to be less distracted, more focused, and I can really get a lot more work done. I can get a lot more research and study done. So this is just another way that I've seen L-theanine work really, really well, and it pairs really nicely with caffeine. They're actually, so if you're caffeine intolerant, you might just skip that part. I know many of you are, but if you're If you are, then stay here. And I'd start with this at just 200 milligrams every several hours, depending on how long you're going to be, at it. But those are some of my favorite ways to use theanine personally, but also with people that come see me in the clinic. So, hey, if you've got a story with L-Theanine, if you've used it and you found it to be beneficial in some way, chime in the comment section below and let us know how it's helped you. And if we were talking about sleep, and if you haven't checked out some of my other crash courses or master classes, if you're struggling here with this sleep piece, make sure you check out my class on sleep. We'll put a link up here for you to watch that master course so that you can you can navigate some of the potentials of improving your sleep quality as well. Thanks so much for tuning in to Dr. Osborne's Zone. I'd appreciate a like. I'd appreciate a subscribe below. If you found this information helpful, remember our mission and goal is to save 100 million lives with solid information, research-backed information that puts the power in your hands so that you can take control of your health and be the best you. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you Thursday for a live Q&A at 12:30 Central Standard Time. Take care.